more talents, but the one who had received 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received 5 talents came, bringing 5 more talents and saying, "Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents." His master said to him, "Well done, good and faithful slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." And the one with 2 talents also came forward, saying, "Master, you handed me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents." His master said to him, "Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many. Enter into the joy of your master." Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, "Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours." But his master replied, "You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I do not sow, and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have more, more will be given, and to those who have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of this Holy Scripture.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
You may be seated. That's okay. The camera is being turned on. I find that I learn a lot from children. Maybe you do too, especially really small children. I learn a lot about who I am and how God created us as humans. And I'm not just talking about my own children and watching them and seeing the worst of myself in them and the best of myself in them, but I'm talking about all children, especially the smallest ones. You learn before they learn to talk that there's a lot going on. You might see one child go up to another child who's playing with a toy, and they take the toy to play with it themselves. And then, of course, we all know what happens to the child who is playing with it first. They begin to... You can fill this in here. The first child who had the toy taken away from them, begins to cry, scream, yes, all of the above. And then the other child is confused. Like, but I just wanted to play with it. Like, I don't understand what's wrong with that. And the child who's now without a toy is upset because, oh no, I have nothing to play with. But I've noticed over the years of interacting with very small children that if you want the toy or the object or whatever it is that the small child has, if instead of taking it and leaving them with nothing, if you hand them something else, at the same time, there's no crying. There's no weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's a little bit harsh in the scripture there. The slave being cast out into the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. But the thing is, there was already weeping and gnashing of teeth going on in this passage. Just like we often learn in children, You see, this third slave, this servant, if you want to use nicer language, of his master, was already afraid of his master. And when he was given 1 talent, he buried it, thinking, oh, he's going to come back for this. He's going to want what was his. And so I'll make sure it's there for a rainy day when the master comes back and wants what's his. And see, the other two, they had a bit of a different mindset. They thought, oh, sweet, I've got 5 talents, or I've got 2 talents. This was some translations use the phrase bag of gold. A talent wasn't a little bit of resources. A talent was a bit of resources. And so they go, and it says they traded with them. The master later, in reconciling accounts, mentions investing with bankers. And he would have earned interest. You heard that part? We all know investing with bankers gets a certain return, correct? Yeah? And so that was true even then. But these 2 who were given more, the 5 talents and the 2 talents, they had bigger things in mind than interest. They traded with them. Now, I don't know about you, if you've ever experienced buying and selling of things, the trading of goods, but it's not always a steady line of increase. If they started with 5 and got to 10, there was probably numbers all over the place in the midst. In between there, they probably at one point got all the way up to 20 talents. Or maybe they went all the way down to 2 talents. Or maybe even just 1. And see, in the trading of things, in the business, in the commerce of life, there were ups and there were downs, and they continued to trade. And so when it came time for the accounts to be reconciled, he had 5 more talents. Now, that's not to say that he didn't actually increase the number by more than that and maybe consumed things. Maybe he fed himself. Maybe he took himself and his wife out to a nice dinner. You know, a really nice dinner. Maybe the dinner cost a whole talent by itself, right? Maybe the cost of living was a little nicer for this one with 5 talents. Maybe not. Maybe he lived very frugally and put everything he had to trading. It doesn't give us that information, does it? But we do know that he was given 5, and he traded with those 5, and eventually he had 10. And then he was given even more things. And that is what Jesus says is a representation of the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like. He's in a series here. Anybody remember Jesus having dinner in Bethany at Mary Magdalene's house? Or Mary's house? One book says this, Mary and Martha are there, and you heard the story where one of them's working while the other one's just sitting and listening to Jesus, and Mary gets upset because Martha, or the other way around. I don't remember right now. You remember the story, right? Jesus having dinner in Bethany, right? And so that's the setting that this is being spoken in. This is kind of at that dinner, or at that occasion. It's the one stop right before Jesus goes into Jerusalem. And so we know what happens there, right? He gets persecuted and killed. And so some of these stories that Jesus is telling is like, these are the last things, and I want to make sure that I get across to you. And so here we have in the Gospel of Matthew, in these chapters, in the mid-20s, Jesus goes through a series of parables, one right after the other, trying to illustrate to them, trying to convince them of what the kingdom of heaven is like. What is God like? Why do you do this? Why do you follow me? It's because this is what God is like, and if you live your life according to this principle, it will turn out for you, or it won't turn out for you. Here's the difference. One had a mindset of abundance. One had a mindset of scarcity. One lived in fear, while the other did not. If the kingdom of heaven is like that, then what we can learn from this is that our God is an abundant God. Our God is a generous God, but our God does not settle. Our God does not settle. And so what that tells to me is that sometimes I hold on to things too much. Sometimes I hold on to things in a way that God doesn't really intend for me. God has given me something and He intends me to put it to use. And whether I return with 5 more talents or whether I return with 0 talents matters not to God, but rather that I played ball with it, that I traded with it, that I trusted, that I said, it is well with my soul. Because, like I said, in trading things, it's not always a straight path. And so sometimes I can imagine that fear might have started to set in when trading is down. Have you ever been in that season of life where it seems like things have just gone south and you can't tell why? Or maybe you can tell why, and that causes you to take your money and put it somewhere else. Like maybe in a hole in the ground. They say, they being investment advisors, financial advisors, that as you approach retirement, you want to move your investments into lower risk. You've heard this? If you haven't heard this, I strongly suggest you at least talk to a financial advisor. But I might disagree with that, based off of the way I read Scripture. You see, because God never is done with you. And we might retire from our work, from our vocation, but we are never retired from our relationship with God. And God is always an abundant God. And so, if we put our things to work, if we put our resources to work for the sake of God, for the sake of building the kingdom of God, if we put our resources into trusting that God is the one who provided those resources in the first place, then we behave differently. Right? If we think of God as an abundant God, I'm not going to worry so much about tomorrow. I might be able to leave my investments in a little bit higher of a risk because I've seen the history of that investment, and over the history of that investment, even though it's considered high risk, its return has averaged 8%. Or I can take it in less risk and I get 1.5% of interest, right? Has anybody seen bond rates these days? CDs? I mean, it's way less than inflation. I'm not here to give you financial advice. I'm here to talk to you about the nature of God. And God's nature in history is that of a high return. Whatever you put into your relationship with God is going to yield greatly. There's a history of it. God has done this time and time again. This isn't a sermon about what you put in the offering plate. Don't get me wrong, but it is a sermon about resources and trusting in God's nature. And I think that a good way to exemplify that is with eggs. Raise your hand if you know Rick and Susie Shirts. Yeah, several of you. They're good members of the church, own an insurance company here in town, and they also own chickens. They own so many chickens that they could probably fill 1 or even 2 of these a day, right? Now, raise your hand if you eat more than a dozen eggs in a week. Anybody? A couple of you? Yeah, Kim, yes, you raise your hand. Every day she wants eggs. Now, if you can get a dozen eggs in a day, and you don't eat a dozen eggs in a week, yet some of us have this mindset towards our finances, towards our resources. Eggs are just an analogy. They're just a visual comparison. And they say, okay, well, for math purposes, let's talk about 10 eggs instead of a dozen, right? So, I've gotten 10 eggs today. I'm going to put 1 of them away for tomorrow. 10%. And I'm going to give 1% away. And I still have 8 eggs today. Am I going to eat 8 eggs today? No. I'll be lucky if I eat 2 or 3. And then tomorrow I'm going to get 10 more eggs, and I'm going to give 1 away, and I'm going to save 1 for a rainy day. But then I've still got 8 more eggs. And if I'm lucky, I might eat 2 or 3. So now in a period of 2 days, I've eaten maybe 6 eggs, and I've saved for put to use for myself maybe 8 each day, 16 eggs, right? I've given away 2 eggs, and I've saved 2 eggs. What happened to the other 10? If I've only given away 2 eggs, and I've only saved 2 eggs, but I've only consumed so much, the rest has gone bad. It's spoiled because it's not been put to use. It's not been given away. It's not been put to service. But instead, what I might do is I might say, hey, anybody that wants eggs, I've got eggs. And instead of giving away to, pardon me, instead of giving away to and holding on to the rest, I might say, I only need 2 eggs today. Who wants the rest? Now, I don't expect anybody to come grab a singular egg. There will be cartons and cartons of eggs. There will be cartons and cartons of eggs when we begin to live our lives knowing that God provides more than we need in life. And if that's not exemplified through eggs, it will be exemplified on our tables on Thursday. Or maybe you celebrate on Wednesday because family's in town that day. Or maybe you celebrate on Friday because family's in town that day and not another day. And you got to go from one city to another city. So whenever it is that you celebrate Thanksgiving, it will be exemplified that there is an abundance for you. And if there's not an abundance for you, then maybe there's somebody who will invite you to their table, who will have an abundance. But if I fear that there won't be enough tomorrow, if I fear that eggs are a scarce resource, if I fear that money is a scarce resource, I'm going to hold on to it. I'm not going to let it go. These are my eggs. I might only eat 2 or 3 a day, but I want to eat them for 20 or 30 days because I'm not thinking about what God's going to provide for me tomorrow. So I'm going to just take these and they'll be mine. Okay? These are going to my fridge at my house. That's not a good idea, is it? But don't we have this mindset towards our resources in life? If I was talking about cash instead of eggs, that'd be so much more accepted of a thought in our society. If I'm talking about cash instead of eggs, that's a normal thought. This is mine. I'm taking it, I'm putting it to use for what I want to do. If I get enough eggs, I'm going on vacation. I'm going to stop collecting those eggs for a few days so that I can really enjoy a 10-egg omelet. Right? But if I'm talking about cash instead of eggs, I might approach things a little bit differently. But why? Money is no different than eggs. Money is, except you can't even eat money. Money is worthless compared to eggs. An egg could produce another animal. Or it can fill my belly. Money is just something that we imagined. That we decided had value. That we decided was scarce. Money used to not exist, but eggs always have. You see, the God that we serve is so abundant. Yet we treat our lives and the resources that provide for our lives as if there's something to be celebrated, when really the one who provides the resources is the one to be celebrated. Let me say that again. God provides all that you need in life. We sometimes think that the work that I put in from 9 to 5 provides what I need in my life. Yet when a loved one gets sick, we think that maybe all those efforts, all those hours that we put in from 9 to 5 is going to take care of our loved one. And sometimes money helps. Sometimes good insurance helps. Money can be a stressor in those times. But there's another way to think about it. The other way to think about it is that God provides. And so I don't know where it's going to come from. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know tomorrow. But I do trust in God's nature and that God is the one that provides, and I can still give even when I don't see tomorrow. You're getting heavy. I'm going to set it down.
We're getting nervous.
That's a sermon illustration in itself. I'll hold on to the eggs long enough, it'll wear you out. Hold on to the things that God has intended for you to put to use, and you might get worn out trying to hold on to everything instead of letting go. Letting somebody else, maybe who doesn't have chickens, enjoy the fruit of your chickens. We either see the world as scarce and we hide our talents. We see the world as judgmental and so we hide our talents. Or we see God as abundant and continually giving, and we trust even beyond what we can see. And that is what the kingdom of heaven is like. That first community of Christians, it says they sold all of their possessions. They gave all of their stuff away. And they made sure that whoever had any need took as much as they needed. There are some families in this church that go through more than a dozen eggs in a week. Let's give them some eggs. Because I can't eat that many. I'm not talking about eggs anymore. Do we trust in God? Or do we trust in our own selves? That's the difference between the slaves that traded and the slave that hid. Isn't it funny that we can learn that by watching children? Either you have, and you trust that there will always be something else. Or we cry, we weep, and we gnash our teeth because somebody else took mine, even if it wasn't ours to begin with.